thank you for coming. Eat food, so I don't have to prove to my friend, or be unproved, that we bought too much food. And I'd like to introduce the mayor of Newton, Seti Warren, who is also on the North-South Rail Link Working Group, and he will explain why he is heading up the group of mayors from around the state who are interested in seeing the rail link happen.
Can you give Franny a round of applause? One more. This is unbelievable. Have this crowd. Local government at its best. This is what it is. It's great to be with you this evening. I need to make sure my constituents in Newton understand what a suburban community really is. This is a suburban community. It's beautiful out here. I have to get out here more. I do want to talk to you very briefly about why I'm here and why mayors around the Commonwealth feel so strongly about this project. Before I do, I have to mention someone that has been a mentor to me for my entire life since I was 7 years old. He calls me up a year ago and he tells me about this North-South Rail Link project and why it's so important. Before he could get the words out of his mouth, I said, I'm in. There's only one person that could do that, and that's Michael Dukakis. He's here. He's been a champion for this for many years, and we really appreciate what you've done for the Commonwealth, what you're doing for us right now. So thanks, Governor. And I know everyone knows John Bussinger, who's in the back there. John, thank you for being a champion for this project as well. And I know there's a bunch of other folks. I did want to mention Congressman Seth Moulton, who has been a real champion, deliberate and thoughtful about leading the effort to support this project as well. I'm going to introduce Senator Eldridge in just a moment, but I just want to say a few words about this project and why it's so important. And I don't mean to use such a sort of attitude around it that makes you think that I think it's just a no-brainer. I actually do think this is a no-brainer. I'm going to tell you why. There are very few transportation projects here in the Commonwealth that address the needs of multiple economies across the Commonwealth, north, south, east, and west, one. Two, that address the needs of transportation, which is a critical component in the economic vitality of the Commonwealth. And lastly, address the issue of climate change and the environment, all in one. It's extraordinary how one project could be such a game changer for a generation. Linking the North Station and South Station does a number of things. You're going to get into the details tonight. It gets cars off the road, thousands of cars off the road daily because of this linkage. It reduces our carbon footprint by over 500 tons on a daily basis. This is all fact-based. 17,000 car trips will be reduced on a weekday basis, These are huge numbers. And when you think about the impact on the ground, when you think about businesses who need employees in this area, who need to employ folks, whether it's retail, whether it's innovative companies, they need employees to come up and down, not just in this region, but they need folks from Boston, south of Boston. It allows for that commute to happen in a much smoother way. It also allows for expansion. When we think about the future of the Commonwealth, we know we can't just rest our laurels on what's going on with the MBTA at all. We need to look at expanding train service and commuter rail service and even high-speed rail. So that's why you have mayors from as far out as Pittsfield. Mayor Tyre supports this project. To mayors out on to the North Shore, Mayor Kim Driscoll supports this. To mayors to the south, we have a great group of city elected officials who are trying to expand their economies on the ground because of the reasons I just said, who are trying to move their residents in and out of Boston in a much more efficient way, that are concerned about the environment and reducing the carbon footprint. This project is something that will do all of that, and there are very few projects that will address all those concerns. For those of you that are concerned about economic mobility and income inequality, when we think about that issue, which I think is one of the issues of our time, and you think about how critical transportation is in moving people to jobs and creating economic vitality, this project addresses that. So again, this, I think, is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. You're going to hear a lot of the detail around the costs and the technical capacities of it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the Commonwealth to put us on the right trajectory, invest in the current generation as well as the future generation of residents, as well as provide economic opportunity for all. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm excited about this. And that's why I support it strongly as Mayor Newton and representing mayors in different parts of the state. So I'll stop there. What I want to do is introduce Senator Jamie Eldridge, who's been a friend for many, many years, who represents this district, who's been a real champion in supporting this project at the State House. As you know, Jamie Eldridge doesn't back down. He's a fighter. That's why I really admire him, and I know that's why he represents you so well. So, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Jamie Eldridge. Thank you, everyone.
Well, good evening. This is a terrific turnout. You know, when I was talking with Franny about what kind of room to get as a politician, I was thinking get the smallest room possible to make sure there's looks big. But I'm glad, actually, Franny, we decided to get the town hall, because more people than I expected turned out. So I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your interest in the discussion of not only improving transit but also expanding transit. I serve as the sort of Senate leader, if you will. Governor Dukakis' suggestion, we have established this North-South Rail working group at the State House, which has business leaders, municipal officials, elected officials, and community leaders to really advocate for this across the state. And so it's been really exciting to come together. There's certainly a lot of significant work ahead of us. I also want to thank Franny for just doing a tremendous job. And Franny talked about it a little bit in her opening remarks, but you know, the robust transportation that now exists here in Acton would not have happened without her leadership, and this was well before she became a selectman. So I really do commend her. And in the same vein, I really do commend Mayor Warren. I really appreciate you coming out here tonight. And I think one of the things that I've seen is it's not too common for municipal officials, including mayors, to take the lead on statewide issues, and he has been a leader on climate change issues, on education issues, on inequality, obviously transportation, and I was just really excited to see him be part of this working group. So I really want to express my appreciation for you for being on the working group. And I would just say, I have a district that, and I know there's a fair amount of my constituents here, but I represent 14 communities, including both the Fitchburg and Worcester commuter rail. So I go down to the Westboro, Marlboro, Hudson area. And you know, obviously those are two commuter rails that right now don't have a direct connection, and the North-South Rink would solve that. And you know, one of my earliest memories of sort of the barrier that today's reality creates is I went to college in Baltimore, Maryland, and just remembering taking the train during school vacations or the summer, and you know, more often than not having my parents have it to pick me up at Route 128 or South Station, because there wasn't a direct connection to the North Station to get out here by train. So I think it's often sort of that obvious, but also as Mayor Warren talked about, it's an opportunity to benefit the New England economy, to improve the whole Northeast corridor, and really, I think, is a great opportunity for Metro West to improve access to places all over this country, and even north in Canada. So I don't want to talk too long. It's my pleasure to introduce Governor Dukakis, and I think one of the great things about Governor Dukakis is that when you ask almost anyone in Massachusetts, they have a story about Governor Dukakis. whether from his time as governor or since. And I was at Town Hall earlier today and talked to the town manager, Steve Ledoux, who I guess was the town manager for Williamstown when you were governor, and you were working on improving the North Berkshire economy, and he had a story to tell about your governor. So it really is true. So with that, I'd like to introduce someone that is really the full sort of moral force behind the North-South Rail Link project and the discussion on making it a reality, Governor Michael Dukakis.
Thanks, Jamie, and thank you all. I must confess that though we love New England, as some of you know, Kitty and I leave town in late January, and I teach at UCLA during the winter quarter. And then we come back, and I pick it up at Northeastern and teach there for the rest of the year. And so we've just come back. And as you know, I'm a mass transit fanatic. But I want you to know that Los Angeles, California is now rapidly becoming a leader, not only in things like climate change. Smog is gone in Los Angeles. Can you believe that? It's gone. I'm serious. But Los Angeles is now building a first-rate, rail-based transit system, as they must, given what's happened to the freeway system, which is, as you can imagine, totally non-functional, including the downtown connector, which is the Los Angeles equivalent, Jamie, of North-South Rail Link. And they're not futzing around, and they're not debating it. It's under construction for a total cost of $1.5 billion. Compare that with the Romney estimates of $8.5 billion, which of course were preposterous. And about a year ago, a bunch of us got together, including some of the pioneers in this thing, with the new administration, and said, this is so important that we've got to organize to get it done. And we've had a wonderful response. Bill Weld and I are collaborating on this. Now, there's a reason for this. He was a young associate in my law firm. I was responsible for him. And as I used to say to him when he was governor, where did I go wrong? Well, what happened to you? But there are a number of things on which we agree, and are really quite passionate. One of them is the North-South Rail Link. Another is Boston Harbor and the Harbor Islands, where both of us spent a lot of time cleaning that place up and turning it into a wonderful recreational area. And the most recent one, interestingly enough, goes right back to the northwestern part of the state, where the two of us were deeply involved in trying to take North Adams, which was a severely depressed small city, and transform it by creating something called the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. And I don't know how many of you have been out to Mass-MoCA, but let me tell you, those empty Sprague mills are now a world-renowned museum, and by the way, more's coming. A second museum, a restored downtown theater, and in the Heritage Park, which we created when I was governor, the old railroad yards, what is going to be an extraordinary model railroad exhibit. They tell me in Hamburg they've got one that attracts about 1.5 million people every year, and we think we can do the same. So Weld and I are working on these three things. But leading the charge, obviously, is this project, which we both feel very strongly about. Anyway, it's good to be here. I just celebrated my 82nd birthday in November. And I'm married to a woman who's 79 and still is the best-looking Medicare recipient in America, with all due respect to the rest of you. And we're going strong. And one of the things we care deeply about, needless to say, is this Commonwealth and its capital city, but more than just the capital city, because as both Jamie and Seti have said to you, the impact of this particular investment is extraordinary and absolutely essential if we're going to continue the economic success that we've been experiencing in this state. And let me just say a few brief words, and where's Brad? Then I'm going to introduce you to the guy who does a great job of presenting this thing, and I think you'll be very impressed when Brad Bellows talks to us about this and gives us a quick look at the project. We've had a separation between North and South Station forever. It's about 1 mile, and the reason we had 2 separate stations, Paris had 4, other cities had this, is because in the old days it was the private railroads that ran the passenger system, along with freight. And every one of them wanted a station. So any of you who've been to Paris, there are 4 stations. One of them's now a museum, but 4 stations, and they were all related to the private railroads that ran them. In our case, we had 2. New York, New Haven, and Hartford, and the Boston and Maine. New York, New Haven, and Hartford had South Station, Boston, Maine had North Station. There were lots of special commissions and reports saying we ought to link them, but until we, in effect, took over commuter rail as a public enterprise, they were run, as a matter of fact, when I was first elected, they were still being run by the private railroads, which we were subsidizing. And by the way, they were terrible, just awful. Once, of course, the ownership combined in one entity, in this case, a public entity, there was certainly no argument for separate ownership. And in point of fact, even before that, we can show you special commission reports going back to 1910, 15, whatever, recommending that connection. It just never happened. Brad will tell you a little bit about this history. But you can't have a first-rate commuter rail system. You can't have a first-rate public transportation system. And you certainly can't have what we have, which is essentially 2 separate railroads, 2 separate railroad systems that are costing us about $100 million more than they ought to because they are not unified. Seriously. Not to mention the enormous numbers of people that would be attracted to it, the thousands of cars that would no longer clutter our streets. Not only that, but it's on the Northeast Corridor, right? And this opens up the possibility, obviously, of through service from the South, Washington, New York, not just to Boston, but through Boston to northern Maine, and I hope in my lifetime to Montreal. Seriously. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. But none of this, folks, is possible. None of this is possible unless we connect these 2 things and stop fooling around with the notion that expanding South Station will solve the congestion problem. It won't. Nobody in the railroad industry these days is expanding stub-end stations. Nobody. And yet we're still hearing from Mass DOT that you got to expand South Station, and they're working on a plan. Are you ready for this? That will cost a minimum of $1.6 billion for 7 new tracks at South Station. I kid you not. Now, if you connect the 2 stations, you don't need extra tracks. You'll have a few left over, because the trains will come in, stop for 4 minutes, discharge passengers, take them on, and go on to wherever their destination is. And that's what's happening, folks, all over the world. And I hope Brad will have at least a few illustrations of what are literally dozens of cities now that are doing essentially this. We know what they'll cost. We know the impact. No question, Seti, that they will have extraordinary impact on our future in many, many ways. And in point of fact, folks, when my Secretary of Transportation, Fred Salvucci, who in my judgment was and is the best state Secretary of Transportation anywhere, came to me and said, now don't get excited, he said, but I think we ought to be putting the artery underground. I said, gee, Fred, I'm a man of faith, but we had torn down a number of those ramps in the downtown. I mean, you have no idea how many ramps, Jamie, at that time were feeding the artery downtown. We knocked down a bunch of those. But who was it? Barney Frankel once said it would be cheaper to raise the city than to press the artery, you know. And George Kavarian, when he was speaker, was a very funny guy, was always talking about the kind of depression that this project would bring with it. And Fred said to me, but we're going to have a double rail line right down the middle of it that will connect North and South Station. Of course, at that point, he had me. And then, folks, we had this titanic battle with the Reagan administration, which didn't want to do the big dig, didn't want to spend any money on the big dig, and went crazy when they heard that we wanted to take a single traffic lane and devote it to a double rail line. And I don't know whether you remember that battle, but it got so tough that we finally had to retreat on the rail line. And even then, President Reagan vetoed the Big Dig project, specifically vetoed it. And we had to fight to override it. Overrode it fairly easily in the House because Tip O'Neill was a big supporter of this. And thanks to a guy named Terry Sanford from North Carolina, we overrode the President of the Senate. But we didn't do it with a rail line right down the middle of it. To his credit, Bill Weld, who succeeded me, picked up on it, went to work on it, pulled together lots of folks, including Brad and John Bussinger, and a wonderful guy named Bob O'Brien, who was the chairman of the Citizens Oversight Committee. Had enormous help from Ted Kennedy, who had a lot to do with producing the nearly $5 million that went into this very detailed economic and environmental assessment with some preliminary engineering. It was 80% complete when Romney and his people effectively ditched it and then put out this ridiculous figure of whatever it was, 8.4 billion and so forth. We know what these things cost, folks. It's somewhere in the range of $700 to $800 million a mile. And we're talking here about a project which with approaches will be a little less than 3 miles. And it's not that we haven't had experience with this. How many of you have ridden the Red Line extension from Harvard Square to Alewife? That's 3.2 miles. It's 140 feet deep at Porter Square, right? It was done with early versions of this remarkable tunneling technology. This is not going to be the big dig, let me tell you. I mean, nobody even knew it was happening under Cambridge. And that project, in current dollars, cost us, Brad, help me, $1.5 billion, $600 million, not $8.3 billion. So this is really very doable. But we've got to produce some very strong public support. And SETI's doing a great job of mobilizing the mayors. We've got, I don't know how many legislators, Jamie, I mean, 150? 145 endorsing this project. Lots and lots of good people, business community, labor community, all over the place. Our job is to convince Charlie Baker to get off this station expansion kick and to get serious about this project. That's really what this is all about. And that's why we're working so hard. We had a good meeting yesterday with the governor's chief of staff, Steve Kadish, who had the great good fortune to work for me, for Weld. He's now working for Baker, and a good guy. And our hope is that we can, with your help and your support, really go at this. But, you know, at the age of 82, you do begin to think of your own mortality. And I was reminded of that the other day when I was on my usual walk from 85 Perry Street in Brookline to Northeastern University, where I've been teaching for 25 years. And it's 2 miles over and it's 2 miles back. Now, you know, I was a runner and a cross-country runner and ran the marathon when I was 17. Kitty claims, you know, she was a freshman at Brookline High School when I was a senior. She claims she handed me a cup of water on Beacon Street during that race. This was in 1951. It was a record field of 300, I kid you not. So you could see us. And it's entirely possible because I was dying of thirst. You know, we knew nothing about exercise science or any of that kind of thing. You didn't drink water in cross-country, in the middle of a cross-country race, but this is 26 miles. But I was very enamored of a classmate of mine. At the time, not interested in freshman women. And several years later, she introduced me to Kitty Dixon, and the rest, as they say, is history. And she's one of our dearest friends, so you never know. But in any event, so I'm on my usual walk from home over to Northeastern. This is before we went out to California. And there was a guy who kind of was walking along beside me. And as some of you know, I hate litter, I hate graffiti, and I hate electronic billboards. And so when I walk over, I pick up litter. And anyway, it's the Emerald Necklace, and we're in the process of transforming the Muddy River and all this kind of stuff. So I figure the least I can do as I'm walking along is reach down and pick up this stuff. And I was doing that. And of course, if some guy's walking along beside me, he's got to pick it up too. So this guy started picking it up, and he was a teacher. He taught at Wheelock. So we were walking along the Riverway, and had a nice chat, and I bid him goodbye as he went in the door at Wheelock, and I went on. And about 6 o'clock, my email starts lighting up. You're on Facebook, and this, I don't know, I wouldn't know Facebook from, whatever, I don't understand, where do these kids get all this time? I haven't got time to turn around, and they're on this stuff. Anyway, so they say, you made Facebook. Well, this guy posted, is that what you do with Facebook? Yes. Posted, in which he talked about his meeting with the former governor. And it began as follows. The guy said, I was walking along the Riverway when I saw an elderly man picking up litter. And it turned out it was the former governor. I called Kitty, I said, I've been called every name in the book in the course of my career. Nobody has ever called me elderly. I mean, God. Anyway, enough from me. All I can tell you, folks, is first, a huge thanks to Franny and lots of you who pulled all of this together. It is very important that we build a very strong statewide coalition behind this. And Seti's right. I mean, if the Pittsfield mayor is with us, and we've got mayors across the state who understand the importance of this, and by the way, the importance of their role in building a first-class passenger rail system in Massachusetts, which connects us both with northern New England and with states and cities to the south, then it's awfully important that those of us who are here in the metropolitan area really get into this thing. So we're making progress. It's not as fast as I would like, but we are making progress. On the other hand, here again, I'm not going to live forever. And as John Maynard Keynes, the famous British economist, once said, in the long run, we're all dead. So when people say to me, well, in the long run, we'll maybe get this thing. And I don't want to hear about the long run. And frankly, the need and the importance of this, as both Jamie and Seti pointed out, is now. Now, because there is serious congestion at South Station. There is growing congestion, as many of you know, at North Station. And the easiest and the best way to end that permanently is to connect the two stations. So let me introduce a guy who's just devoted himself. He does have an architecture practice, and I'm worried about it because he's spending too much time on this thing. But Brad Bellows, along with John Bussinger, was an important member of the Citizens Oversight Committee that Bill Weld appointed to provide citizen input into this. And he's done an enormous amount of work, knows as much about this as anybody I know. And I think you can enjoy listening to him. Brad, come on up.
Well, that's a hard act to follow, but I want to thank you for coming out on this beautiful evening, and I also especially want to thank Seti Warren and Jamie Eldridge and Franny Osmond for their work in bringing this together and supporting the project. I want to just give you a little sort of background on why we've come out to act, and it's the paradox of the North-South Rail Link is that while it's located in the city of Boston, the benefits are regional. And although it does benefit Boston, in some ways, the biggest beneficiary is all the parts of the state that are currently disconnected and suffering for that. And so we're hoping to do a series of these events north of the city, south of the city. So this is kind of a dry run for that process. So thank you again for coming out. So the topic is Unified Regional Rail for the 21st Century. We see this as key, as has been already mentioned, to achieving the economic and environmental goals for the long term, as opposed to some of the shorter term fixes that have been proposed. We're starting with, and let me just start the slides. This should. No, yeah, sure, why not? Let me just see if I can get us to advance here. This should. Hold on. We're not doing that. Okay, give me 1 second. A minor technical glitch here. Why is that? I'm sorry, I apologize for this. Just do it the old-fashioned. Sorry, didn't have a chance to fully test this in this space. Escape. One that's coming up first. Well, we'll try this. We'll go this way. Okay, so the current system that we have, as has been mentioned, is two systems. And it's almost 140 stations. It's almost 400 route miles of track. And they're separated by this 1-mile gap in the center between North and South Station. And this has a severe impact on the effectiveness of this rather substantial investment that we've already made. And so what are those impacts? The impacts are lack of connectivity to the transit lines. Everybody on the north is connected to green and orange. People on the south are connected to red and silver, no connection to the blue line. Okay? Now, because of the red line extension built under Governor Dukakis's tenure, the Fitchburg line does have this unique connection to the red line at Porter Square and by car at Alewife. So that's actually a step toward the kind of regional connectivity that all the other lines are missing, but it's still far from complete. So what's another consequence? Another consequence is a balkanization of the regional economy. The North Shore and the South Shore are essentially separated by the Mason-Dixon line, which is the Mass Pike. And everybody organizes their economic life around which side of the city they can have access to. So if you live on the north side, it's very infeasible to work on the south and vice versa. This affects employment patterns, it affects everything. And in the event that you ever have to change jobs, you may have to move your house because you can't get to your job, the new job. So this is a huge, it tremendously undercuts our competitiveness. It means it drives up the cost of labor, and it means that we can only use half of our main resource, which is people. So it also creates a real estate bubble in Cambridge and Boston, because the places where values are off the charts are the few places you can actually get to from every place. So this, again, makes it more expensive to do business here. It means we can't tap the housing resources or the labor resources that exist all around the state. And it also means that we have, again, essentially a broke, we congratulate ourselves on having a sort of free market economy, but the market in a sense is broken if large segments of the market can't participate on an equal footing. And so there's a social justice component to this as well, that by giving everyone access to and tying the region together, giving everyone access to it, it actually makes us a much fairer and more competitive place at the same time. I just want to move ahead with a few slides. One of the, we take for granted the rail system we have, but if we imagine our subway system missing the center, with Park Street being a giant rail yard that the trains have to back out of, it would be totally insane, and we would never accept that. But we sort of take it for granted because that's how the trains have always been in our lifetimes. So another consequence, which has been alluded to a little bit, is that there's a tremendous penalty in terms of the operating efficiency of the system. And Governor Dukakis cited a number of $100 million a year, and that comes from a detailed study that was done in the late 90s, looking at really tallying up all the costs of having to have something like 25% of the train movements in and out of South Station being non-revenue trips, which tie up equipment, they tie up staff. Having 2/3 of the fleet on the south side of the city in the main maintenance facility in Somerville, which means the only way to get to that is to trundle your trains across an old freight line called the Grand Junction with 10 grade crossings through the middle of Cambridge and back. So when you run a railroad like that, you're basically larding on a tremendous operating inefficiency that has to be carried every single day, and it accumulates over the many years. And at current interest rates, which are under 3% for these federal infrastructure loans, you could pay $2 billion with $100 million a year. So our argument is that we really need to look at this, and this is a project that will pay for itself, and that's really just the beginning of the economic calculation. I'll get into it more later. Another consequence of this stub-end terminal arrangement is that we have this tremendous congestion at both of our downtown terminals, and I'm not sure if I've got this in the right sequence. Okay, well, this is a little bit about, you know, the gateway cities across the region that are still hurting, that really haven't come back from the recession, but could, and the resource of people and wonderful old mill buildings that these cities have actually could be a tremendous benefit to us. It's not just to help them, it's to help all of us. So, this is a map of the economic target areas. What's interesting is that many of the cities that are economic target areas are cities that grew up around rail. You know, the Lawrences, the Lowells, the Haverhills, the Brocktons. And so rail is actually particularly well suited to be an engine for their recovery. All right. So another thing that suffers from the disconnection, as Michael mentioned, is that Amtrak stops at South Station and resumes at North Station. If you actually consult the Amtrak schedule for how to get from Portland to Washington, they actually say, get out, take a taxi, and resume your trip. This is their official advice to travelers, which is kind of amazing. So in any case, there's another project actually that New Hampshire is working on, linking their capital city to Boston through something called the Capital Corridor Project, and this would actually potentially relate to a connection to Montreal as well. It's the same route. All right, so that's the Northeast Corridor. The Northeast Corridor, which northern New England has no access to, produces something like 20% of the gross national product for the United States with 2% of the land area. I mean, it's really, really important, and it's a big deal to have them cut off. And this is one of the reasons why, this actually is a reason why we have confidence that this project actually can make a very strong case for federal participation to some extent. Because it is a project of national significance and certainly regional significance, and building that regional coalition is a big part of getting it done. Okay, this is an articulation of the operating cost savings that was projected in $1995, and you can see some of the magnitudes in millions of total annual savings on the right-hand column. We've escalated those numbers to current dollars to generate, I think you end up at something like $140 million in annual savings with some of the alternates. So obviously we have this huge, in addition to the congestion problem we have at our downtown terminals, we also have a huge highway congestion problem. This is after the completion of the Big Dig. The Big Dig was a wonderful investment in the urban design of Boston, and we should be, you know, it's been transformational, but it hasn't been transformational in transportation terms. Another image also. So this is what we want to move toward. We want to move from these two separate systems to an integrated system where each line is connected, is paired with each southern line is paired with a northern line and vice versa, and the trains run through the system and have cross connections with the main subway lines, which you can see in the center. Okay, and these kinds, as Governor Dukakis said, these sorts of projects are being built all around the world. We'll talk about some of those examples. They're never simple, but they're, compared to all the other alternatives, they make so much more sense that that's what everybody's doing. This was an estimate done by the Central Transportation Planning staff in 2003 of the additional ridership that this project would draw on the basis of its greater convenience, and it was 96,100 additional new riders. That's a huge number. This was the greatest ridership increase of any rail project they looked at, and the carbon impact of this is tremendous, as you can imagine. This project also has the impact of taking passengers off of certain overburdened commuter transit lines. So it actually benefits the transit system, it benefits the highway system because it pulls people from the highway. And unlike many other solutions, it's very scalable because the capacity of a through system can handle a tremendous increase in the number of trains over the coming decades. And so it can grow with our economy and do it sustainably. Okay, so the congestion issue at the downtown stations, I just want to spend 1 minute looking at South Station. You see the head house in beige in the upper right, the curved building, And the yellow platforms are the 7 additional platforms that are proposed for the amazing sum of $1.6 billion. Now, that project started out in the range of a few $100 million. It's escalated to 850, and then within a year and a half, it was up to 1.6 billion, and presumably still counting. And it has a devastating impact on the value of the air rights on this waterfront site, because the first 2 floors have to be devoted to trains, not people, which is 500,000 square feet. And it also raises the construction costs. So the T's own assessment is that the revenue from this joint development will not pay the cost of the project. So there's really no plan to move forward with this project yet. And this is a proposal. You can see the buildings that are proposed with rail service under them. Our argument is that this project needs to be stopped, and the money needs to be applied to something that's a better investment. Okay, I'll skip over this. These are just some headlines about the escalating cost. It was 1.4 at this point, and it's went up another few $100 million since this accounting, which was in mid-2014. That's the T's assessment of the non-revenue contribution. This is a land taking from North Station, not widely known, but the T did do a land taking for 2 additional platforms at North Station. There's also a plan to spend at least $100 million rebuilding the bascule bridges that serve North Station. So our view is that these 2 terminal expansion projects need to be seen as a single project approaching $2 billion that would be obviated by the need by a link. It's a schematic design of the new platforms at North Station, which you guys would be using. Okay, so what is modern regional rail? It's not this. We used to have one of the best regional rail systems in the world. Obviously, we've fallen somewhat from that position. So what is regional rail? So in France, the way it works, they have 550 train sets on their 20-odd regional rail systems. About half of those are what are called bimode trains, meaning that each car is self-powered, and they can run on either diesel or electric power. When they run electrically, you have all the benefits of high acceleration, which shortens the journey times, which means you don't need as many train sets or crew to run the trains, or you can do the same service with less. It also means that you get more riders because the journey times are shorter. It's more competitive. It means the maintenance costs are lower because it's easier to maintain electric equipment than diesel. So this is what they're doing in France. And as they electrify their lines, because obviously in where it's very low density service, it's not cost effective to electrify everything, and they're not crazy. They're not, living on math. They're trying to be business-like like everybody else. So what they do is, as demand warrants, they electrify, and they gradually phase in go from the bimode to fully what are called EMUs, electric multiple units. England, this is one of the Bombardier bimode MUs. In France, in Provence. The British have just signed multiple contracts to buy Hitachi bimode equipment for their systems. And these are now running on multiple lines. And like the French system, these are a little different because they're high platform like ours. The French ones are low platform, which has other advantages. But this is essentially where the world is heading. And while it's very critical that we obviously deal with our backlog of maintenance, we've got to keep our eyes on where we need to be and make sure that as we improve catch up on our maintenance deficit, we aren't just reaffirming essentially obsolete practices and locking in unsustainable, dysfunctional systems. A couple of more, I guess I would say, eye candy from European systems. These are some beautiful trains in France. This is a diesel MU operating in Germany. Diesel is another option. One of the things that's important about these MUs that's been an obstacle here, which is being addressed, is that the Federal Railway Administration had safety standards that made these incompatible with operating in the freight railroads. And on some levels, this made sense. Nobody wants to die in a train wreck. But rather than turning all the trains into bank vaults on wheels, it makes more sense to make them crash resistant. We don't impose those kinds of standards on cars or buses or airplanes, and if we did, we wouldn't have any of those operating. So the reform of the FRA regs is really important. Another thing that's happening globally is there's a blurring of the distinction between trams and trains. There are multiple systems that are now running their regional rail systems right through their center cities as if they were trams, like the Green Line. Jump There also are advances in electrification in power systems that are letting trains be powered either by batteries that are charged in the stations or superconductors in the stations, which can be charged in a matter of seconds, or powered by under the track bed induction power systems. So there's going to be more happening in this area, but which we need to keep our eyes on. But basically, I'll just jump ahead here. Sorry, the microphone cuts out when I cue the images. There we go. All right, this is a superconductor-powered train set, actually in, I think, Doha, if I'm not mistaken. Still somewhat experimental, but all right. And this is an example of one of the Alstom Citadis Dualis dual tram train products, which I was mentioning earlier. Okay, and just the other thing that needs to be part of our sort of vision for where transit is going is, I would say, it's qualitative. We want the more frequent service that these shorter train sets give us. We want the better performance. We want the efficiency that lets fares be low and without bankrupting the system. But we also want quality. For too long, transit has been seen as the transportation of last resort. Take it or leave it. No real respect for the customer experience. Certainly not beautiful. And when you look at all of these successful European systems, they're beautiful. And that's a big part of it, because you've got to respect people and make them want to ride it. And these are some brand new trams operating in The Hague in Holland, built by Siemens. Level boarding, beautiful stations. This is a new subway station on the Jubilee line in London, built by Norman Foster, who designed our Museum of Fine Arts edition here in Boston. These are the entrances, beautiful curved glass canopies, station interior, new subway station, actually a new rail station just being completed now in Hong Kong. You don't even want to look at how much is happening in Asia because they're just really moving ahead by leaps and bounds. All right. So let's bring this back to the Red Line. The Red Line started with a highway expansion project. This is Central Square, big interstate highway proposed through the middle of Central Square. That was stopped. We built the Red Line extension instead. You all know it. This is what was there. This is the old car barns on the Charles River. There's the boathouse, Harvard dorms. We had basically stub-end railroad for the Red Line on the banks of the Charles River. We used tunnel boring machines to drill under Mass Ave out to Porter. These are automated machines that many of you may be familiar with, but basically it's just a conveyor belt with a giant drill at the front, and the drill can be, the cutter head can be optimized for different soil conditions, everything from wet sand to granite. The soil goes out the back, new concrete liners go in the front. It's a very predictable and controlled process. We've done a half dozen major projects in Massachusetts already in addition to this, including the harbor cleanup and water and sewer projects. They're in use all around the world. It's nothing like the Big Dig. Some details, which I'll skip over. This is what they look like on the inside with the precast segments. This is London Crossrail. London's building a 76-mile rail link east-west through the city. They've already built a north-south rail link. They're working on a second north-south rail link. Crossrail consists of 2 tubes with about 2 13-mile sections and 40 new stations. The project is due to be completed in 2019. These are photographs of the old car barns on the banks of the Charles, which were taken away in the early 1980s. This is what's here now. This is the route, and you can see on the lower slide that the construction method was to dive from Harvard on the far right to be deep at Porter so that station could be mined from below without cutting open the city at the top at Porter Square. And then it rises back toward the surface at Alewife. And this essentially, and it's been obviously transformational for Somerville and many other places on the system. So this is the method we're talking about for Boston. The Big Dig, the Big Dig cost overruns, the big reason we're still talking about this, $22 billion when all was said and done. The method we're talking, but the Big Dig actually gives us the option to do the rail link because it's, by working under the Big Dig, we have a completely cleared transportation corridor without buildings, by and large, without utilities. And so this is where the alignment would go. We'd have 2 portals at the south for the Dorchester and Old Colony, Portal on the left for Back Bay, and 2 on the north for Fitchburg on the far left, and running up toward Lowell, Haverhill, and Rockport on the right. There's a more detailed drawing of that. Can you hear me when I'm not facing the microphone, by the way? Okay. Pardon?
If you don't talk into the mic, you won't be caught by the TV.
Well, I don't know. I have to do that. Let me see if I can move this. This might. Let's see if that works.
Wait, here's the mic that you can take with you.
All right, great. That'd be better.
And we can use this for the questions.
All right, thanks, Franny. Is that working? All right, great. So much better. All right. So, in dealing with this cost issue, we've said, let's really take a hard look at what these projects should cost. And let's look at places where it's more expensive to build anything than Boston. We're not going to look at the places where it's easier and cheaper, obviously. So we look at Switzerland, we look at Sweden, we look at Germany, we look at London. This is an international cost, and Hong Kong. This is an international cost index of construction costs. You can see the U.S. is down here, and all the other places we've looked at have higher cost. So what are people spending to build these projects? This is Zurich, their main station, bigger than our South Station. And they built a 3-mile rail link that opened last year for $2 billion. Now, it had only 1 underground station. We're talking about 2 or 3. So let's add something for that, okay? But it still ends up being close to the cost of our terminal expansions. By not having to expand their terminal, they took this green area and were able to develop that into a major new R&D district for the city. The tunnel extended on a loop through the city and out the other side. It's carrying something like 360 regional trains per day and 140 intercity trains per day on 2 tracks, which is the total capacity of South Station with 13. So this is a profile of it. Like Boston, it had to go under a river, it had to go under old buildings. So there's no reason why things should be that much more or any more expensive here than they were there, other than the fact that we have a lot of trouble procuring our infrastructure efficiently, and that's a longer discussion that we need to get to the bottom of. This is a cross-section through their project. This is their discussion of why they're doing it, to renounce definitively the doubling of the existing Zurich main station. Okay, we'll jump ahead. This is the research center that they're building on the old, what would have had to be rail yards. This is the finished tunnel, opened last year, right? This is Leipzig, Germany. Again, a big stub-end terminal, just like South Station. They built a rail link under the city with 4 stations, I think, downtown. Here's a diagram of it. Stockholm's doing the same thing. They actually built a rail link back around 1905, and they ran out of capacity, 2 tracks. They were carrying hundreds and hundreds of trains per day, including freight. And they're just in the midst of completing a second 2-track rail link under the center part of the city. Malmö, Sweden, built a 2-track rail link, I think opened in 2006, $1 billion, under budget, ahead of schedule. Here's their main terminal. The new glass element that you see is the head house for the new underground station there. This is one of the stations in the center of the old medieval city, a diagram of it, and the economist crowing about how efficiently it was done. This is out of sequence. This is an image of the route of the new Stockholm rail link as well. I'll jump ahead. There you go. Some construction photograph of that, and some diagrams of this new station in the center of Stockholm. This station was being mined underneath the main Stockholm transit station, sort of their equivalent of Park Street, with escalators bringing people directly from rail to subway. So we have the big dig, and it's been this wonderful urban design benefit, but we've got this hangover, essentially, of bad feeling about the construction quality and especially the cost. But one of the things that we've talked about is the impact of this precious window of low interest rates, which are now under 3%. I think 2.55% for TIFIA loans, which are for transit projects and rail projects. If we can't build infrastructure at 2.5% interest rate, when can we? Because delay, in this case, there's talk about the time isn't right, let's push it off until the future. I think delay is not our friend, particularly in terms of interest rates. And another issue with waiting is that the alignment itself is at risk.
We have a white-hot construction market in Boston, construction happening all up and down the corridor. And one of the critical sites is a place called Hook Wharf right there, where a 26-story building has been planned. And that's the point at which the railing turns into the artery alignment. And if that building goes in with deep foundations, it could kill the project. So it's really essential that the alignment be protected and that we move forward before other buildings are put in the path of this. This is a Globe editorial urging that the alignment be protected, which has not yet happened. So let's take a second and look at land use. This is Woodette Circle, about which much discussion was had during the Olympics. The city has estimated they could get $100 million a year in property tax revenue if this were developed. The state wants to put a parking lot for trains here to support South Station. I mean, from just an economic standpoint, it's insane, but that's the plan. And it's not just Woodette Circle. This is one of the renderings that was done during the Olympics. And you'll notice that all those buildings had to be built on a giant deck lifted up over the tracks. The city also estimated that before they could get their $100 million a year, they'd have to have tax abatements for decades to compensate the developers for the cost of the deck. So if you put the trains underground, which the rail link would do, it would make these kinds of developments much more rational and beneficial to the city, both economically and civically. This is just a drawing showing Woodette Circle in Google Earth right there, right? Okay. Same thing is planned at Beacon Park Yards in Allston, on the banks of the Charles River and near Harvard Business School, Boston University. This is a photograph of where the layovers will be maintained. They've been layovers there for a long time, but this the stub end terminal project at South Station would require them to remain. And one of the paradoxes here, or something that's worth bearing in mind, is that removing surface rail from our city has been a really important part of the resurgence of Boston in recent years, because Boston used to be full of rail yards, as Governor Dukakis mentioned. This is Copley Square. You can see the Boston Public Library in the upper right-hand corner, Boylston Street running along the top of the slide, and everything in the upper left was Boston and Albany Railroad, where Prudential Center is. So move forward. There's a photograph of it looking toward the Lenox Hotel, and a photograph from the Lenox Hotel looking toward Christian Science, just to see how vast these yards were. And that's what's here now. And this is far more beneficial to the city than a giant railroad yard, so why would we be going in the other direction? So in summary, I guess I would say there's a psychology that you run into where people still just feel it's too big. It's just too much. We've been through the big dig. We're just not sure we can handle it. You know, nobody wants to, people feel uncertain. They think it's overreaching to do something as bold as tying our two stations together. It might cost billions of dollars. It will cost billions of dollars. But I think it's important that we remember what made Boston great was there was a boldness. We weren't just sort of keeping up or barely keeping up. We were setting the standard. And that boldness was coupled with a lot of business wisdom. And so I think we want to remind ourselves of what the legacy is that we've inherited from previous generations and try to measure ourselves against that. Let's just do it as a thought exercise. So this is a photograph of the Back Bay under construction with the Charles on the left and the flats that were just being filled, where Beacon Street actually ran along that embankment there. You're looking toward the State House, you can see it in the end, right? That's what's here today. I mean, it's really the jewel of Boston. It's phenomenally valuable. And that value was entirely the creation of some very smart investments 150 years ago. This is the Hoosick Tunnel, not very well known, but it's part of the Fitchburg line. It was the second longest tunnel in the world when it was built. It's still the longest tunnel east of the Rockies. It was opened in 1875, and it was built because Massachusetts industry was walled off from its raw materials and from its markets by the Berkshire Range. And rather than give that up and take the consequences, the state said, we're going to build this. We're going to make a tunnel through the Berkshires. They had steam, they had nitroglycerin, and they didn't have all the tunnel boring machines we do, but they did it. And it's still in active service 24/7 today for freight. Here's a cross-section of it. We built not just a really nice library in Copley Square, we built the first public library in the country. Public library. It was a revolutionary idea. It must have been, people must have felt a little exposed doing something nobody had ever done before. But they did it, and they did it beautifully. And same with the subway, the first subway, not New York. This is the New York Times headline, sort of enviously talking about this new thing in Boston called the subway. The Charles River Basin, the Emerald Necklace, MIT and our other research institutions, which are still the foundation of our prosperity today. This is, let me just see where we're going with this. Okay, so that's essentially the presentation. We're near the end. If you're interested, I've got a few slides that'll give you some of the history that Governor Dukakis talked about how we got to our separate north and south station. Do you want to spend another 5 minutes on that? Or, okay, we'll be quick. So this is a map of Back Bay in around 1850 or 60. I don't remember the exact date, but the Charles River's at the top. You can see the public garden on the right, part of it. So Charles Street would be there. And you see these two railroads crossing on embankments, what is still an unfilled river basin, right? So the railroads were actually in Boston before there was Boston. And they built, it wasn't just 2 passenger depots. We ended up with 2 when they consolidated, but there were like 5 or 6. This is the passenger depot for the Boston and Providence, which was at Park Square. Let me see if I can move this head. That's what it looked like. And it's up, you can see it up there in the upper part, B&P Depot. And there was a separate depot down here for the Boston and Albany and the Old Colony. Two separate buildings, 3 separate buildings actually for three separate railroads. And, okay, this is, again, right near the Old Colony and Boston and Albany. So that's actually why we have an Albany Street down there. On North Station, same thing. We have so here's the Old Colony Depot, right? And there's the Boston and Albany. Now we're at North Station. You can see several more. We've got the Boston and Lowell, the Eastern Railroad, which is the one that went up to Rockport and Newburyport. We've got the Boston and Maine Freight Depot, and then the Fitchburg Railroad, and the Boston and Maine Passenger Depot is in the upper right. Here's a blow up. This is the Boston and Lowell Depot, and you're looking down Causeway Street, and you can see them lining up where North Station later was built. This is the Fitchburg Railroad. This is the Boston and Maine Railroad in Haymarket Square. Another view of it. And then around, I forget the exact date, but late 1890s, maybe 1896 or so, this Union Station was built, so-called. That's what North Station was originally called. And it was the unification of all these terminals into one very spectacular building. Tell me I don't have it here. Oh, it's not in this slide. I'll show you. It's actually really spectacular. Let me, well, if you bear with me, I got it here for you. Let me, well, you know what? I don't want to intrude on your patience too much, so we'll just have to forgo that. It's on our website, northsouthrailing.org. Let me get back up to full size. Where's that? There we go. So anyway, there was these, let me see. Oh yeah, here it is, Radisson. So that's what North Station looked like when it was built. It was stunning. It was one of the biggest railroad stations in the country. And it was a glorious gateway to the city and a gateway to the North Shore and to Fitchburg. I mean, this was not sort of scuttling in like a rat, as the term Vincent Scully used to talk about his experience after the end of Penn Station in New York. I used to enter New York like a god, now I scuttle in like a rat. This was, you entered Boston like a god through this gateway. And South Station was, same thing happened at South Station. This is 1900. And the interesting thing you'll see there is within a year of opening South Station, there was a rail link between North and South Station running as an elevated line. This is a view of it at Rose Wharf. So they had a rail link, right? And it ran until World War II when they took it down for scrap. And South Station, but the issue was, but they went on to say we need a rail link, not because they couldn't get passengers back and forth, but because the trains were so bollocksed up with the stub-in terminal. They had 28 tracks at South Station. Here's a picture of it. That wasn't enough. They were out of space with 28 tracks. So they wanted a rail link. They drew a map for a rail link. You can see the green route right here is essentially the route that became the central artery. It's interesting. So there were commissions to study it. And if you read the the proceedings of these meetings, they talk about the very same things we're talking about today, which is the inefficiency of the two stub-end railroads, both operationally and in terms of transportation. There was a very extensive debate in the papers about how to get it done, and World War I came along, and by the end of World War I, the car thing had taken off in a big way. The railroad traffic was starting to dwindle, and we'd missed our historic moment. Well, the historic moment has come back because the highways are completely maxed out. The economy wants to grow. We've got this whole sustainability issue, which nobody was aware of before. This is a drawing of the project that Fred Salvucci persuaded Governor Dukakis to proceed with. And you'll see it's got 2 train tracks right down the center. This is in the 1970s. And this is the planning study, one of the early planning studies, 1978, for the Central Artery Project, showing what they called the North-South Transitway Corridor at that time. And obviously that didn't get done, and we are trying to change that today, and we hope we'll have your support in bringing more rationality and more of a long-term focus to the transportation solutions that we need. So I thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For questions and answers, it would be good if we use the mic when you ask a question, and if somebody didn't use a mic, will you repeat
I'll
the
try and do
question so
that.
that
I'll try and be better in the
the
Q&A than I was during
the TV and internet
the lecture,
audience
so.
can answer. I just wanted to mention
Go ahead.
a few people that I forgot to mention before. From Nikki Tsongas' office, Russell Pandrus is here. And she had to come late due to another meeting, but our representative, Jen Benson, who was one of the co-hosts, arrived. And I just wanted to thank all the Acton people that support transportation, including our recently retired health director and our present transportation coordinator, Doug Halley, and Mike Gowing, a former selectman, and our citizen committees, the SATSAC and TAC, the Transportation Advisory Committee, and the South Acton Train Station Advisory Committee. So I thank you all for your support. Yes. Oh, I said at the beginning. So Katie and Janet, why don't you stand up? Is Janet still here? Oh, there you are. They're fellow selectmen from Acton. And there's so many people here from so many agencies and organizations that we've been working with in our whole region.
I've actually got one myself.
Yes.
Kurt Martin from the Association for Public Transportation is here tonight. Kurt,
So
are you still here? There you go.
Anyway, I apologize for not recognizing people. So why don't you raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll run around with the mic.
Hello, thank you.
Hello.
I think this is an absolutely terrific idea. However, I have a question about what about the existing rail links that start from Fall River, can go to Worcester, up to Lowell, and then off into Newburyport?
You know, there's a vast network of railroad systems that are, in some cases, semi-abandoned, sometimes still functioning, but one of the key reasons that we focused on this particular approach is because of the importance of the Boston metro area and connecting with the transit systems of it. I would say I'm open to looking at other options, but I think the advantages of connecting through the city are actually extremely compelling because of that.
I agree. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that this isn't a really excellent approach. What I'm saying is if you're looking for an argument that says we can do something
Right.
that's functional and gets Amtrak north, gets connection to New Hampshire and potentially up in Canada, down, the ability to take the Fitchburg line, the Worcester line, all the various lines, and be able to get off at a station and go north or go south.
Has that been looked at? I'm not aware of studies of that, are you? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Hence my question.
right. I can't answer that.
No, I'll let you call on people, and then I'll run the
Okay.
mic over.
All right, thanks, Franny. Senator Eldridge, Shamie, I'll give you the mic. Here you go.
So Brad, thanks again, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very exciting. And my question, whether for you or for Governor Dukakis, is through the history of the Big Dig, so the Central Artery Project, whether, Governor Dukakis, when Fred Salvucci did the drawing to, more recently, where were the sort of obstacles or where did the north-south rail link get dropped during this period of time? It's one thing I've never fully understood.
So what happened was when the funding came up, Reagan vetoed it. And then there was a furious negotiation, and Governor Dukakis can probably speak to this beyond what I can say, but there was a frantic effort made to sort of marshal the votes to overturn Reagan's veto. And it came down to one vote. I think it was Governor Terry Sanford from North Carolina, I think, who changed his vote. And part of that negotiation was to get rid of the rail component. And under the circumstances, it was one of these really hard choices to make, particularly for someone who only did the project for the rail connection. But that's what happened. And almost immediately, there were efforts made to try to bring the project back. Governor Dukakis talked about Governor Weld's efforts. He put together a task force in 1993, within just a year or two of coming into office. I actually was on that task force, and that's how I got involved, as a much younger person, I might say. But in any case, we worked out a scheme to put the link back under the under the artery tunnel box. There was this very wonderful and seasoned engineer named Morris Klubach, who was part of the team, and he developed a scheme to extend the side walls, the slurry walls of the artery, down to create a protected excavation space under the artery. But as the artery costs began to spiral out of control, that process was curtailed. Meanwhile, Senator Mitchell from Portland, Maine, had worked to get funding for a more serious and bigger study based on our smaller one. And that effort started in '95, and it was pursued as a deep bore, like the Red Line extension, twin tunnels, 140 feet deep. And I should mention that the depth, which I don't consider ideal to be that deep, but it's perfectly workable, as Porter Square shows, and many other actually quite nicer stations around the world. But to get to that depth, you have to start, 0.8 miles or something from the deepest point because of the limiting grade of trains. And so that makes it a longer project than it would have had to be. But there are benefits to that because it also gets the rail underground sooner, which protects these sites like Woodette Circle. So, does that help? Does that answer?
Yeah, very helpful.
Okay, great. Let me just, John, so ma'am, you had one? I'll give you the mic.
I was just wondering, I've heard rumors that there's some kind of phantom space left in the Big Dig somewhere. That there's like some unused tunnel there. Is that true or not? Does anyone know that?
I don't think it's true.
Is there plenum space?
What it sounds to me like I've heard this has come up a number of times, and I think it may relate to this notion that I just mentioned of extending the slurry walls to create a protected space for this. You see what I mean? And that's a process that was funded, and some millions were spent on it, but it was abandoned, basically. But it never took the form of an actual excavated space.
Well, I was thinking that if it's only a mile,
Yeah?
and it might cost less if there's plenum space
Right.
somewhere in the Big Dig.
Well, okay. I wouldn't that would be wonderful. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, but I'm not for a train, but
Yeah.
a moving walkway.
A moving walkway, yeah. Well, the moving walkway thing, I don't want to get too far afield tonight, but I think, we are certainly open to value engineering ideas, and we've speculated about many of them, and I'd love to see them pursued before the project is finalized. But one of the discussions has been about the initial project was 3 stations, and it was 3 stations so it could have connectivity with all the subway lines. Stations are one of the most expensive parts of the project, as you can imagine. Tunneling is easier in a way and more predictable. It's automated. The station process is not. So if you could remove a station, there would be a significant saving. So one of the things we wondered about is shifting the north station a little bit further to the south so it connects to orange and green at one end and connects to blue at the other, perhaps with some people mover component. But that's not something that's been studied to the same extent as the other aspects of the project, and perhaps should be. We have people who are from here. I want to focus on the citizens. So, in the pink shirt.
I think you already got one of my questions. I can show you the Globe magazine, Sunday Globe magazine article where it says the slurry walls are going down and we're going to build the bottom deck so that we could tunnel out under it if we need to. Because I still keep all that junk, but it never happened. So that was one question. The two other questions are, why not just run, let's start quickly, get a rail line running in the tunnel that exists now, take up one of the highway lanes. Take off one of the highway lanes in the existing tunnel and put rail there.
A really interesting idea, which I also have thought about. Why not put it in the highway tunnel? You could make a new tunnel for the cars, with a tunnel boring machine. One of the challenges with, I think that should be I'd be up for looking at that, but I see real problems with it because the grades of the highway the highway has a sort of a pretty wavy up and down profile. And I think the grades are greater than 3% in some places, and that could be a deal breaker for this idea, although I certainly admire the creative thinking. All right, was that anybody, do we agree to grant a second question? All right.
So the second question is, we've got a rail connection between North Station and South Station. It's not got the capacity for commuter rail, but it could certainly take Amtrak through cars. You mentioned it. We got the trunk line in South Cambridge, or the industrial line running through South Cambridge. We could be running Amtrak cars today from New York City to Portland, Maine, on there. And you said, oh, gee, we've got 10 grade crossings. Each of those grade crossings is within 100 yards of an existing traffic light that we could move. And without disrupting traffic, we could run rail cars through South Cambridge. I'm not saying we shouldn't do this north-south rail link, because we should. I'm saying we should be moving quicker. And the way to move quicker is use existing infrastructure.
So I'm getting a little bit of an echo that made it hard. I think I may not have gotten the whole thing, but I think you were talking about the Grand Junction line and using that essentially as a quasi-rail link. Is that right? Right, yeah. So does everybody know what the Grand Junction line is? Okay, if you're the BU Bridge in Boston, over the Charles, there's a funny little railroad bridge that runs under that. That's the Grand Junction line. It kind of scoots along through MIT and it crosses Mass Ave and through Kendall Square. It actually runs through an MIT building. And it is a kind of rail link. But the reason why it doesn't make sense for what we're talking about is because it bypasses downtown Boston, bypasses most of the subway lines, and therefore it really wouldn't provide the transportation benefit that we think is needed. So, not to mention the grade crossings, which I assume there might be some solutions to if you put it underground or something, but it just wouldn't do what we would accomplish by working through the city.
Massive opposition in Cambridge.
Yeah, I live in Cambridge. I can imagine that. Yeah, I would say the state is actually kind of interested in this idea as a sort of workaround to not have to deal with the complexities of the actual north-south rail link. The problem is it only connects, it's a very fragmentary connection, and it misses the whole point of it, which is the city, the transit system. That's what people want to get to. That's what they need to connect to, and some fragmentary thing that only gives you 20 cents on the on the dollar, as it were, is not, we don't think, solving the problem.
I'll quickly point out that the Grand Junction line you're talking about is actually a part of the Urban Ring project, which is yet another project which Boston's put on the back burner and which needs to be pushed forward. I think it should be pushed forward in tandem or right after on the tail of the north-south rail link.
Actually, I appreciate your bringing up the Urban Ring, and it's interesting, politically, the Urban Ring and the north-south rail link have often been pitted against each other. In transportation terms, they're not in any way incompatible, they're actually supportive. And in fact, one of the really important points about the north-south rail link is that because it's an intercity rail project, not a transit project, it is not directly competing for the kind of transit funding that would be needed for the urban ring. And that's one of the reasons why we need to treat this in a regional way, as an extension of the Northeast Corridor, and as an FRA project rather than an FTA project, Federal Rail versus Federal Transit. So that's definitely been something there's been a lot of thought about, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
I guess the question I have, what do you see as the biggest institutional barrier for this? I mean, we just saw a commission from 100 years ago, something from 15, 16 years ago. My observation is you're talking about the South Station expansion here. That sounds like that's a DOT bureaucratic train going on its own track, so to speak, that clearly predates Charlie Baker as well. I mean, that's not something just started. So I guess the question is, that sounds like to me, that's really a waste of money? Okay, I mean, I think, so what do you see kind of institutionally is what is the biggest barrier that needs to be overcome?
South Station expansion was the Patrick administration's solution to the South Station capacity crisis, and it's a real crisis. Now, it's been very frustrating for those of us who've worked on the rail link because this was foretold in great detail 15 years ago. This is no surprise. I mean, it was in our reports. Nothing was ever put in the way of a credit toward our project in the financial analysis for solving this problem, which we now know is $1.6 billion. I mean, so by kicking the can down the road, it turned into this massive thing for which no plans had been made, and I can't speak to the details of how this particular plan was formulated, but it is a very unenlightened approach to a capacity problem. Philadelphia has a 4-track rail link that they built in the 80s. It carries something like 660 trains per day through the city invisibly, and South Station expansion won't even approach that when it's all done for this huge amount of money. So there's a lot. It's really hard for an organization that's invested significant money in a project to admit that it was wrong, to change course, even for Governor Baker, who had no part in it. He just inherited it fully formed. But we think that the shortcomings and the cost in particular, as the cost is starting to sink in, because it was never visualized as costing that much. This is sort of something that arose late in the day, and this gets into the whole issue of procurement and why are our projects so over budget. And that's something that, honestly, it could affect our project as much as the others, and it has to be solved. That's why we're talking about global best practices and really figuring out how is it that Switzerland can do something for a quarter of what we thought it would cost us to do.
It will also require acres and acres of land to store the trains.
Yeah.
I was at a meeting yesterday, and I said to the folks who were there, do any of you know what was going on where the Prudential Center now is? I mean, what was that? Is there anybody in the room who knows that? The answer to that question? Yeah. A few of us old timers. What was there? Railroad yards. Right in the middle of some of the most valuable land in downtown Boston. I mean, today, can you imagine? And there was Mechanics Hall. If you wanted to go see a prize fight, you go to Mechanics Hall, right? That was it. Right in the middle of the city. I mean, to use the land at Wedette Circle, or for that matter, out near Harvard, for the storage of trains, it's really crazy. I mean, the economic benefits to the city and to the state of using that land for constructive, tax-reducing purposes is huge. And with the link, you can store trains anywhere. You don't have to have a valuable downtown land. It's really kind of crazy.
So to this point about the economics, I think a lot of the social ills that we find around us have their origin in bad bookkeeping, because what ends up on a balance sheet and off a balance sheet can be very artificial, and you end up with policies that are getting distorted by the fact that making something somebody else's cost instead of your cost, creates a sort of economic rationality. But think about potholes. Somebody hits a pothole. A pothole could wipe out 100 cars a day for $1,000 each, but to the DPW, it's a $500 charge on their books. An economist friend of ours who said something to me today, which I'm sort of interesting. He said, Massachusetts has substantial rail assets, but the lack of connectivity, the rail link, diminishes the value of those assets. You can think of the absence of a rail link as a form of a tax placed on the present and a tax on the future. And so part of what we're arguing for is a more holistic way of looking at regional economics, so that things that appear to not make sense economically when they're looked at very narrowly, you see the economic logic when you take that step back and look at the bigger picture. And the example that Governor Dukakis cited of 80 acres of prime real estate being just treated as train parking, when it could be so much more valuable, and that doesn't appear on the balance sheet or the bookkeeping for these transportation decisions so far. That's something we got to fix. John, yeah?
I just want to say something briefly about this area, why it's so special to me and to us. Mike Dukakis and I did Coolidge Corner, passing out leaflets in the late 90s, and we got a great response. A friend of mine named Sue, who was on the same task force as Brad, a friend of his from the Sierra Club, she and I and some other members went around the entire state to all the commuter rail stations and stood in the morning. The two stations that gave us the wildest enthusiastic response were South Acton and West Concord. So I wanted to say that tonight to congratulate you people on your savvy. And it's a pleasure to have Senator Eldridge here who helped get the money to restart the project. It's also been a pleasure to serve with Mike Gowing, former chair of the Regional Transportation Council, and myself, and I'm on that, and so is Franny. So I want to congratulate the area. You have something special going here. You can really help us out. None of the alternatives do what the rail link does. And so if you guys lobby it and really make your voices heard, we'll finally get it done. Ted Kennedy used to say to me when Romney stopped it, he said, "Don't worry, John, we'll get it." I wish we could have done it in his lifetime, but we still have to finish the mission that he was so helpful. And want to thank you all for coming.
Thanks, John.
So I completely understand the necessity and the logic of having a line that goes straight through and connects the stations. One thing that I'm curious about in this plan is, I know that you've looked at a lot of European rail systems and their efficiency and their design. Is this part of a larger plan to make the entire system more logical or more efficient, I suppose? Or is this really just focused on north-south? That's all we're thinking about right now? Because you do parse them in the presentation, and I think they're both very important, and I just want to get a clearer idea.
Fantastic question. This is something that is clearly the work of multiple phases over many generations. And we foresee that this will be done with the heavy construction first, getting the tunnels and the stations in. We have only one electrified line right now, which runs the Providence line into South Station. And the entire commuter rail operation runs on diesel despite that, right? So to operate through the tunnel, at the bare minimum, we would need to use dual mode locomotives because you can't run diesels through a tunnel 3 miles long. So the base option is to buy dual mode locomotives, keep the rest of the carriages as they are, and wait for the economics to justify something more than that. But in talking with really super experienced rail consultants who are working around the world, they're telling us that the economics of converting to rail are a lot better than we've understood, and that we need to put that on the table from the outset, because it's, if you look at places like Toronto, they've done studies of their system and found that if you electrify the system and run it just like an old-fashioned railroad with peak period service, catch the 8:05 into Boston and come back at 5 o'clock, it does not make sense to electrify. But if you use EMUs, these shorter trains, and you run them throughout the day, which you can do efficiently with 3 cars, not 6, you actually start making money, or breaking even, or even making a little money. And so we think it's likely that when the business case is developed, it's going to be possible to electrify more than just to electrify significant parts of the system. And if we go with the dual mode, the bi-mode EMUs, like the ones I showed in France and England, you could electrify parts of lines. So the inner part, where you've got lots of ridership and you get the biggest bump in terms of the added performance, you do that and you switch to diesel as you get into lower density places. So we also think that by transforming the system in this way, you start increasing the constituency for good rail. And it's sort of a one step at a time thing. It's got to get a little better before people start trusting it and wanting to use it. And every increase in sort of the constituency makes it easier for politicians to improve it further. So it's a stepwise process, but we see this as a really key first step to getting into a very different place. Thanks. There you
Hi, thanks. So what can the people who aren't really involved do to help?
It's a great question. I think coming out to events like this is a wonderful start, and I thank you so much for that. We have a website, which actually we had a lot of help from Ken Truesdale, who's sitting in the back here. We launched this last fall. It's got a wealth of information on it, some of which you've seen tonight, but also technical reports and information about some of these other projects that we've talked about. I think getting involved politically, attending MPO meetings, supporting your legislators like Jamie Eldridge and Nikki Songus and others who've been really stalwarts, Seti Warren, who've been stalwarts on this project, writing letters to the governor, talking about the importance of this in terms, honestly, and make the case in terms of fiscal prudence. This is economically rational. This is not a religious argument. This is about making wise long-term investments and not squandering money on things that are fundamentally inefficient and unsustainable and don't provide much service. So,
Letters to the editor and social media.
there you go.
I do the former, not the latter. No, seriously.
Yeah.
Every
He's
one
right.
of you now, with this fascinating information technology that our kids are living in, I don't understand what they're doing, but in any event, but it's amazing what happens when you use social media for these kinds of things. There's a guy named Trump, that's kind of using it every day. And he may or may not make it, but it's clearly been kind of a signature for his campaign. But I'm serious, folks. You folks can be enormously helpful in this kind of thing. First, in seeing if we can't discard this station expansion thing, which is really nuts. But more importantly, seizing every opportunity you can to connect through social media and others and really gin it up. Believe me, it can be extremely helpful. Extremely helpful.
Couldn't agree more. Okay. Yeah, there's a North-South Railing Facebook page. Do you remember the handle for that or whatever it's called? Okay. I'm one step behind Governor Dukakis in understanding social media. Great. All right. I think there's a link to it on our website anyway. Yeah. northsouthrailing.org.
If I understood the images that you showed me correctly, you have a proposal that you're going under the canal and then Fort Point Channel and then coming back into and underneath the central artery. Is there a way that you can go underneath South Station and get right underneath the central artery without going into the...
Did you get the question? It's a great question, and we have a good answer for that. So when we looked at this in 1993, we did exactly as you said. We went under the old head house and across the front, under the parking garage that's in front of the Federal Reserve Tower. And you slide right into the artery. And we thought that was a pretty good plan. There were some complications with it, though, because the bus station, which was built by Tufts University over the tracks, I'm sure you all know, it's called the South Station Transportation Center. It's this big silver building. It's got a pile field of 110 concrete piles that run down to a deep elevation to conflict with the train. So those would have to be modified. The building would have to be underpinned. It was a significant deal. And when it was looked at again from 95 to 2003, the decision was taken then to keep this as a nominal choice, but it was felt that swinging wide into Fort Point Channel under the post office would be easier. Right? Now, in the meantime, the world has moved ahead, and as you may have seen in the paper last week, and it's actually been in development for many years, and we've met with the developers and very good people and all that, but there's a plan to build a 40-something story building directly over the South Station head house, and that project is moving ahead, and that really would be the final nail in the coffin of this idea. It had other issues already, but this is kind of like, nah. They were in the way, and there were schemes to possibly work around them, just to provide new structural columns that would be in the proper locations. It was a complicated thing, doable, but when you add to that, that was not a deal breaker, but the 40-story tower over South Station is a deal breaker, because it's one thing to underpin a couple of levels of bus parking, it's another thing to underpin a 40-story tower. That's not going to happen. So we think we've got to be in the Dorchester so-called Dorchester Avenue alignment, which is under Fort Point Channel. There's some variability in the alignment there. I think we might want to shift further into the channel because of some new buildings that have occurred along the channel, like Independence Wharf, Atlantic Wharf, which weren't there in the late 90s. But this is one of the reasons that Governor Baker has authorized finally a few weeks ago $2 million to restart this study. We're putting together a scope for that work, and this is going to be a very major scope item for this upcoming study, to bring all of these potential conflicts up to date and figure out which ones and what the solutions are to them.
Do your cost estimates include 3 new stations, 3 miles of tunnel, not just the 1 mile between the two? Because that's, when I hear the project, that's what I envision. Oh, it's just a 1 mile tunnel, but really it's closer to 3. Is it just 2 tracks? And will it also budget for the electrification and the replacing of the stock from all diesel to these dual motor?
So, great question about cost estimates and what scope do those cost estimates represent. So what was studied in the 95 to 2003 process, which was this thing that was done with the money that Senator Mitchell got, was a range of scopes: 2 tracks, 4 tracks, 2 stations, 3 stations. There was a range of costs. Those costs were then dramatically inflated to reflect, quote unquote, the artery experience. Big contingency factors were put on top. We came up with a stratospheric number that basically killed the project. Our approach is, we need a new cost estimate, a serious cost estimate. We're not going to produce it. It wouldn't be credible even if we did. So rather than trying to produce a detailed cost estimate that reflects all these things ourselves, we're saying, let's look at comparables. Let's look at what other cities are doing. What are they paying? Like I said, let's look at expensive places, not cheap places, like more expensive places even than us. Let's try to make some rough estimates of, well, they had 3 stations, we have 3, or they had 2, we have 3. Zurich had 1, we have 3, that sort of thing. It's not scientific. It's not where the process needs to end. It's really a sort of putting the onus back on our transportation planners to figure out, why can't we do what everybody else is doing? And we do need, and in terms of the cost of electrification, we've gotten some rough estimates of what that would cost. As I mentioned, I wouldn't consider that part of the base cost for the project. I'd see that as a subsequent phase, hopefully a pretty rapidly, a phase that we move to pretty quickly, and we think the business case would warrant that. No, you'd run dual mode locomotives, and you would, and so that actually brings up another complaint that we sometimes hear, which is that, well, we just bought new diesel locomotives, which is true. We did. We bought 40 new diesel locomotives. I forget what they cost, $5 million a piece or something. I think there's someone here who may know that. But, I mean, several, like 4 or 5 million. Anyway, and the dual mode locomotives, which Bombardier makes, and they're a wonderful product. They're in use in Montreal, and they're in use in New Jersey as well. It's essentially 2 locomotives in one. And those are $7 million. So they're even more expensive than the ones we've got. So what we imagine would happen, it's unfortunate, if this project had been done years ago, we wouldn't have bought the new ones. Okay, so that's one of the costs of delay, right? But, so what do? These things happen. We're not stopping just because of that. So what we think would happen is some trains would continue to terminate at the surface. So those would use those diesel locomotives. Trains that want to run through the system, which would be some fraction, would use the dual mode locomotives, and you sell the locomotives you don't need. They're brand new. There's a world market for these things. We've sorted out, hopefully, all the birthing pains that they had when they arrived here, because they didn't actually work properly. But you take a little bit of a hit on the ones you don't need, and you move ahead. That's the way we look at it. Well, I'm not sure I followed the squeezing 6 lanes. Well, you got from the north, you got Rockport, Newburyport. Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah. Yeah. You're talking about squeezing that into 1 or 2 tracks heading to the south. Right. Through traffic, and the same for the south. Right. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be an issue. When you look at these, any of the rail link-based systems, and there are dozens of them. I cited the example of Philadelphia with 4 tracks, which has 660 trains per day running through it. That's much more than we have here now. Zurich, any of the others, they have tremendous capacity. I mean, you have to design the switches and the crossover so they can get into the system properly, but it's basically a very high capacity thing when you have run-through service. If people are, I'm here until people want to shut the lights out, but are we at that point?
Well, actually, I don't mind going on. I suppose people could just leave, but I was thinking maybe we could wrap up and have a smaller group just ask questions of you afterwards.
If people want to, you would not
Well,
be being rude to leave at whatever we're at, 8:45 or something.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so you want to just go,
But
continue
you're
to.
not active here, and you would not be being rude if you decide you need to get home to your family.
And I do want to mention, somebody asked what you could.
Medicare recipient in America.
There's a-
Said to me when I walked out the door, "Now when are you going to be home?"
Oh.
I said, "No later than 10 o'clock."
He said he wouldn't be home later than 10, so.
So if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to kind of slide out the door. But let me.
So, right, no, I think we will end, but I think we will end, and then people can talk individually to you before you go. And I know it takes about 45 minutes to get to where you live, because I do. I do want to, I just say, when somebody asks about what you can do, working as a team, everything that we've been doing in this area really took yes people. I'm always talking about yes people. I see Selena Shaw and Keith Bergman, who are the town administrators from our neighboring towns of Boxborough and Littleton. And Keith is also the chair of the Magic Subregion and the vice chair of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And it took, I remember going for Governor Patrick's grant and Selena saying, yes, let's go for it. And that helped me, another volunteer, move forward. And also working with Montechusett and Lowell Regional Transit Authorities, Mo Khan and George Kahale are here from those areas. And it just is very important to speak up, as the governor said, and also to support people and work with them who are working locally, because we can't work in a vacuum. And
Flood those media opportunities. I'm serious, folks. I mean, every time you see something, bingo. Get something out there. It's really, it really is a remarkable technology, and more and more people are into it. So
well, I think we're going to close up and individually ask questions. Thank you very, very much for coming, everybody.